ourselves so we can all hear.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Tim. It's so good to see you. So they all know that to put their questions in the chat box and that you'll read them.
Oh, there, I had you muted. Sorry.
Oh,
We'll get started here in a second.
okay.
All right, we're at it there. Denver for that.
Jane, you want to read it? Yeah, right. Well done.
Do we want to mute?
Mute that, no, they can't hear. But you should turn off your sound. You should.
Mine's muted.
Okay, yeah. But you should also turn off your speaker. I did. Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get started. No, your speaker needs to be. I think it's this.
Yeah, that needs to be muted.
Come on.
Mine's muted.
It's this one. There. Nope, yours is still on. I know you're muted, but you need your speaker to also be muted. There you go.
Okay. Who knew you can, anyway.
Uh-oh, Marshall, I don't know about Apple. They're right here. Okay.
Okay, so we don't need to hear them. Nope. All right, I think we got the tech figured out. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being with us tonight with Exploring the Sacred. I see mostly familiar faces. It sounds like, or looks like most of you are familiar with who we are and what we do, but we've been doing interfaith dialogue for over 20 years now. And some of these guys have been here almost the whole time. And we have a couple of new faces. One new face literally from tonight, Jeremy, who will be joining us. Yeah, we're just throwing him into the mix tonight and appreciate him being with us from the Episcopal Church. You're the interim priest?
Hi.
Great. Yeah, welcome. Wonderful. So we'll go ahead and just start by having everyone introduce themselves, just which religion you're from or which congregation you represent.
I'll start with me.
Just right in.
I just showed up 5.5 weeks ago. I'm Jeremy Lucas, the interim priest at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. And I've just happily found out about this amazing group and was invited to come tonight. And, you know, I happen to have grown up as a fundamentalist Southern Baptist. So somebody said I was an expert in the subject. I don't think that's true at all, but I really am humbled and thankful to be invited to participate. So thank you.
As the second newest member of the group, I'm Rabbi Colby Morris Dahari, and I am the rabbi here at Har Mishpacha, which is the Jewish congregation of Steamboat Springs.
forgot to introduce myself. I'm Marshall McCarthy and a moderator of the group.
Marshall and Tim founded the group, so moderator is modest. Until said, I'm the founder of the Buddhist community here in town.
I'm Karen Post, and I have led the local A Course in Miracles study group for the last 28 years.
I'm Tim Selby, I'm from here at Howard Steamboat and Methodist Church.
Right, so as you know, tonight's topic is on fundamentalism. And we kind of came up with our own definition of fundamentalism. And basically, just this idea that fundamentalism is a strict adherence to rules, the idea that there's just one truth, it's an inflexible belief system, very literal interpretation of scripture and dogma or ideologies. And there's an idea of like you're in or you're out, kind of like there's an in-group and an out group. And this could show up in any faith. I did just a little bit of reading this morning on fundamentalism, and it sounds like it was like late 19th, early 20th century when fundamentalism kind of got started in the Christian tradition. But there's really been a rise in fundamentalism, you know, in the last 20, 40 years. And some of the reasons that they were pointing to for that was increased globalization and more secularism, which was kind of interesting that as secularism has increased, fundamentalism has also increased. And in the United States, we had a meeting about secularism some months ago, but about a third of people identify without religion, or it's a category called nuns, no religion. And so just interesting, I thought that the increase in fundamentalism almost is a response to people in the world being less religious and more globalization happening around the world. And so I guess we'll start, you know, all religions teach love and treat one another the way you want to be treated at the core of their religions. So I'd like to start with a question around how that gets perverted in fundamentalism. Like, how do you start with this premise of love and kindness and treating others with respect? And then often in fundamentalism, it becoming about us versus them, you know, people committing violence in the name of religion and things like that. So who would like to start?
I have a question for the expert. In my mind, it seems that we might be talking about two things. Is there a distinction between fundamentalism and what's its relationship between evangelism? Are they the same, or are they?
They're cousins. I think I would say, I wouldn't say that every evangelical is a fundamentalist. I don't think there's a literalism that comes with fundamentalism about sacred scripture and sacred text. And there are a lot of evangelical, people who are firmly in the social justice progressive kind of category. Evangelical just means being a witness to. And so I know a lot of progressive evangelicals who are doing a lot of great work in the world who are not fundamentalists at all. So that term evangelical has gotten used and kind of overlaid onto things like fundamentalism. And it's just, they're just not the same.
He is an expert.
So,
job.
just grew up in it. I'm just lived in it, so.
I'm happy to answer a little bit. And when I think about religious fundamentalism from a Jewish perspective, in my mind, I'm thinking about not just Orthodox people, because likewise, I'm sure that there are Orthodox Jews that I wouldn't consider fundamentalist people. But more so kind of the ultra-Orthodox mentality, the super right-wing, not just in politics in Israel, but also just the worldview of the ultra-Orthodox right. And where I think that perversion happens, where I think that shifts from an intention of good to potentially harmful is when, so I think that it's all about fear. I think that, especially in the Jewish tradition, I think that there is an abundance of generational trauma that goes back not just from the Holocaust, but from generations and generations before. And because of this generational trauma, I think that it plants deep within the Jewish spirit a fear and a particularism, a sense of huddling up and joining together, and it's us against the world. And I think that unfortunately, you know, while that is understandable, I think that the more that we shelter into our own echo chamber of trauma, really, and fear, the less that we are able to understand the world around us. So the Hebrew word for ultra-Orthodox is haredi, which literally means separate from the rest of the world. And so it's in the ideology to be separate from the rest of the world out of survival. And I think that that's where the us versus them kind of lands in the Jewish fundamentalism that, you know, I'm sure we all have different opinions on it, but I think that it's extremely problematic in allowing all Jewish people to acknowledge each other, but also all of humanity to have that connection and that equity and equality.
Go ahead.
You know, for me, to take the fundamentals is really important. I mean, it's actually excellent. You know, from a Buddhist point of view, our fundamentals are don't cause harm, propagate good-heartedness, and tame your mind. This is the rock of the church. All Buddhists agree on it. So is it fundamental? Yes, it's fundamental to our faith. But we also have to understand that everybody has a different sort of karmic life. Everyone has different needs, and different medicines work on different people. So the idea that me as a Buddhist would ever imagine that someone else ought to do what I have it is a complete lack of respect, and I think a lack of sensitivity to what changes people, what moves people, what helps people. And if that's what we want to do, then to try to export what I believe on someone else it's just bad medicine. It's just bad, if that makes sense. So there are fundamentals that I think all traditions agree upon. But we need to remember this is our belief. I believe that my fundamentals are helpful. And I hope and believe that your fundamentals are helpful to you. It's when we try to impose them, that's when I think everything goes astray.
Would you need those three?
The fundamentals of the Buddha taught in sort of 3 cycles of teachings, it is said. The first one is don't cause harm. The second one is propagate virtue, love, compassion, kindness. And the fourth is what we say, thoroughly tame your mind, which is to discover your own fundamental, inherently awakened nature. And those are fundamentals. And with that in mind, whenever I'm lost, I don't know what I'm doing, what I ought to, measure myself against, I just come back to that. It's so simple. But I also have respect and kindness for others to understand that they may be dancing to a different tune. And how can you say you love someone if you fundamentally feel, you know what I mean, aggressive towards their beliefs? It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So from the course's point of view, there's absolutely no way it can be used in any kind of fundamental way, because the whole point of it is how to basically, break out of your in the box thinking. How do you question everything that you believe and sort of not take it as fact. In fact, it really teaches that your perceptions are creating your reality. So it can become insular if you never think outside your box. And yet, what I noticed in leading this study group for 28 years, it's very difficult. It's scary for people not to have something to hold on to that says, this is the truth, or this is how I should think, or how I should act. So even with a book that says, after you're done reading it, throw it away because this is not a belief system. It's just a way of unlearning everything. People want to take something out of that and say, this is how it should be. This is the right way to think. So I think it's part of human nature that living without definition, especially if you haven't done a lot of inner work, is pretty darn scary. So it's like if we haven't created the inner skeleton, spiritual skeleton, we look for an exoskeleton for safety. And here is the catch, as Colby was saying, then that safety, anything that thinks differently, makes me question not only the world but myself, because I don't really know me. That hasn't been, since birth, I've been told to follow rules or think a certain way. And letting go of that trapeze and coming inside becomes really, really scary. And thus it becomes insular. And this is why the outside becomes a threat, because it makes me question me. It makes me question this stability that unfortunately is outside of me rather than inside of me. So there's this push-pull. As I said, having worked with a book for 28 years, that really makes you sort of give up that outside stability to find an internal strength. Even with people who are consciously trying to do that, it's very difficult. And so there's always that challenge. In fact, I use in our group a lot what I understand to be sort of a Buddhist metaphor, which is pouring out the teacup. If you don't pour it out and let it be filled up again with warm tea, everything becomes stale and cold. And yet, as soon as you learn something, to spill it out again and let it be refilled again, it takes a lot of practice.
I want to kind of come back to something you said, Tim, on I think probably most fundamentalisms are rooted in a good intention, right? The intention is good, to be true to something, to be committed to something, whether that's your family or your religious tradition or your homeland or whatever it may be, to kind of be true to something that you find ultimately valuable. And so I think I didn't grow up like Jeremy, but I spent a little bit of time a long time ago as what I would think of as a fundamentalist Christian. My dad back here, he can attest to that. I was probably pretty annoying because I knew the answer, man. I had it down. And there was a lot of reasons that broke down for me. But my heart was good. It was out of loving and pure good intention, right? And I started to see for me where it kind of got where it went off the rails, and didn't function the way that maybe I wanted it to, or that it should. And so I think to acknowledge that most people are trying to do something good, trying to be committed to something, trying to stay true to something, and when that gets off the rails, I guess for me is when it becomes divisive of our humanity, to what you had on there, Kobe, it's when it does that. We're all in this room, we're all human before we're anything else that might make us separate from each other or different from each other. We're all human first, right? fundamentally, we come onto this world sharing a common humanity that it's common to all of us. And so when the things we learn later on start to divide that common bond that we share, I think we started to lose track of something there. So
I have a question for you about
yeah,
that. So I totally agree. And my question for you and for all of us, especially those of us in the Christian, Jewish, or Muslim traditions, which within the religion itself, these three religions have a lot of texts about other people, right? One example from Judaism that's coming to mind, every time a Jewish person is called to the Torah, we are supposed to say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, you know, when you come up to the Aliyah, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. Which means in English, thank you, God, for choosing us Jewish people, to come to the Torah as your chosen people, right? That particularism. It's there also in Christianity, talking about, you know, all kinds of other people, and really inherent in that also in Islam, right? About the infidels, about other people. And so I'm curious, how do we reconcile, you know, we can all believe in our hearts that we're all human beings, but within our tradition, how do we reconcile with that language of, essentially, of that lends itself to fundamentalism?
Become Buddhist.
I was hoping you were going to stop with I agree with everything you're saying. Yeah, I think that, yeah, for sure. That's, you know, and that's like that, we all have that tendency to sometimes define ourselves as maybe most by what we're separate from. You know, and identity is an important thing. We all have to have a tribe, a place where we belong, a place where we feel comfortable, a place we know the story. Like if I go on O'Neill's tomorrow at 8 o'clock and there's a bunch of Avalanche fans in there, I'm going to be like, these are my people, right? And so that belonging is important. And I think you see it in all of our texts, and I think you see it in the prophets, and I think you certainly see it in Jesus. What I see Jesus do over and over again is invite us to make our boundaries bigger than we've ever made them before, and to grow into that. And as we grow into that, in some sense, we leave where we've been behind, not because it's not important, but because we continue to grow and build upon that. And so for me, like that I read in the prophets and in Jesus, this push to like, you know, it's often been said, like the problem when you draw a line between you and other people, Jesus is always on the other side, you know, like to make that boundary bigger. So I think one of our jobs in faith and our tradition and what we try to do is, and like we're here, right? So like, is to say like, it's not just about us, it's about you, it's about all of you, it's about community. And so I think leaving those divisions, learning how to grow and leave those divisions behind is the arc of our faith.
This is such an interesting question. Sorry. So sometimes I think that this is a question of spiritual maturity on a kind of larger scale. Because I can remember, not that I'm a perfect example of anything, but just in my little microcosm, I can remember when I was younger, my spiritual life was very wrapped up in the difference between what I thought and other people. And I thought mine was right, other people was wrong. And there's a kind of insulation where you kind of incubate in that kind of artificial certainty. It's helpful in a way, but it also, as you've said, it also closes us off from the rest of from the very world that we are called to relate to. It's very odd, but over the years, actually, I think everybody's great. I want people to find their path and their joy, and that is my spiritual life, is to celebrate people and really be willing to see the perfection in every person. This is part of the Christian tradition as well, I know that. But for us, this is the proverbial rock of the church, which is all beings inherently already perfect. My late teacher once said, he said, if we see faults in others, it's because of our own shortcoming, our lack of seeing clearly. So I always think of it as being like a sort of great grandmother who looks at the little nasty little 8-year-old boy and sees this perfect jewel. And I think that kind of grandmother's eyes, this is what we all asked, to see the world and through those eyes. So I think it's a developmental thing. And I think it could be the whole traditions or the whole styles could get stopped in that development.
Yeah, I wanted to, yeah, and I want to hear from you too. So yes, to all things, I totally agree. I'm a Jewish renewal rabbi. This is one of the streams of Judaism. And one thing that we do, which is one reason why it was difficult for me to remember the exact traditional words to that prayer that I just shared with you, is that we find it our responsibility to know what we're saying, and when we come up against something, whether it's in liturgy or whether it's in study of religious texts from the Torah or the Talmud, we feel it is our responsibility to change it if it doesn't align with some of the things that you said. So we, as renewal practitioners of Judaism, we actually changed that particular blessing to Asher Bachar Banu Im Kol Ha'amim, which instead of saying, thank you God who chose us from all of the other people in the world, we say, thank you God for choosing us with all of the people in the world. It's the change of one tiny little Hebrew word. I doubt if Larry and others in my congregation even noticed that I make that change.
Oh, I noticed.
Okay. Good job, Larry. You're paying attention to that. So there are certain changes that we feel like it's our responsibility to do. And I think that that's what sets us apart from fundamentalist Jews who take the word as is and find it necessary to make meaning from it.
Yeah, it's tricky. There are more fundamentalist Christians in the world than any other type of Christian in the world. I wish that wasn't true, but fundamentalism is by far the most popular and fastest growing part of Christianity. You go into any city and you will find a fundamentalist church with 5,000, 10,000 people coming to it every single week. And I don't like that. And part of what I understood growing up is that, we read these texts and we read them as being expansive. Love your neighbor means loving your neighbors, right? All of your neighbors. But in the fundamentalist tradition, it does not necessarily mean that. It means that you love people who are in, and you love the other people by trying to get them in.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that. That's how fundamentalism works. It doesn't work as I love you for who you are. You're great just the way you are. You're Buddhist, love you. Wonderful. That's not the way it works. My salvation in fundamentalism is dependent on me loving people into this salvation. Finished. So my fear in fundamentalism when I was growing up, it was, if I don't get people into the faith, I'm going to hell. Right? This is just the way it was. And sadly, I think more people want the certainty of simplicity and God in a box rather than an expansive view of God that they have to consider and think about and cause them to change the way they already want to live. And I hate that. And sometimes I don't even like identifying myself as a Christian to people, because if you have a brand, if you have a brand and everybody sees a Christian and all they do is try to convert you, And all you see on TV is, you know, preachers healing people and doing all kinds of things and saying all sorts of things. That has been my experience. That when I say that to people who are amongst the nuns, I just moved from Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon is about 20% religious. 20%. And that means even people who profess any type of faith in a higher power at all. So 80% of the population of Portland, Oregon, if I say I'm a Christian, all they see is, you know, some old Jimmy Swagger, you know, thing on TV, and they think I'm gonna try to convert them. Nothing could be further from the truth, but it doesn't matter. I don't get another chance. So it's a brand question for those of us who are in the Christian tradition who do not feel that way. And it's almost every single time we're having to explain, yeah, but that we're not all like that. But enough people are who have hurt enough people that sadly we don't get a second chance. So fundamentalism is this weird thing where we say all traditions and all faith traditions believe in loving and this, that, or the other. There's a limit to that love. There's a limit to that connection. And so I don't know the answer to, you know, fighting that other than to not fight it, because I think the fight against it gives it more power and more energy than trying to love it. It's a hard knot to untie, but you can't untie a knot by pulling tighter. So
I had a question, or just an addition to that. I think also,
Hold on, we need to talk to the mic.
For the people online.
I didn't really want any attention, but
I like it without the mic, but. Voice.
Lower the
volume
Too loud.
of the.
I can look fine.
I hear all the natural voices easier.
Yeah, but they're recording.
There's people online who need to hear, yeah.
I think that something goes along with what he said, and because I was raised Baptist as well. And so there was a fear to question, you know, big fear to question. So it didn't even enter the realm of possibility to question. And so I think that also is a huge wall.
keep it easy, keep it simple.
It's sort of a question about all fundamental portions of all religions. It seems to me that in fundamentalism, one is getting a constant reward for convincing someone else to think exactly the way you think. And the leaders of, I hate to say this, but I think all religions and set this as a reward. In the Eastern Europe, Ashkenazi, you get into a town, the folks who are practicing that come out and everybody has a tefillin mobile. So they drive up to you and they want you to put on phylacteries. And if you do that, I'm not sure whether the reward goes to you for getting that person to do that, or the reward goes to the person who does it. But there are lots of
The man who does it. Women
or the
cannot.
women who do it
In that
on
tradition.
Tuesday mornings. At any rate, I'm just wondering, is that a part of fundamentalism all the way across? We're going to reward you for convincing someone else to believe what you believe, or you will be rewarded.
Interestingly enough, one of the commitments that I take is sort of subsumed by other commitments. One of the commitments that I take is to never do or say anything that weakens someone's faith in their tradition. It's an actual commitment we make. Yeah.
Well, what do you say to strengthen their commitment to Buddhism?
I don't.
You're obviously not proselytizing.
I think people are intelligent, and if they hear something that works for them, they'll go for it. And I don't think we need to convince anybody that that has a certain smell factor, as you know.
Maybe just a minute, we'll do questions in a minute, but I.
haven't even finished the first question.
I just asked one question. This is great, though, you guys are hitting on all the questions, so no, it's okay. But I would like to just talk a little bit more about that question of why it's so popular. You know, I think the statistic I read this morning is 25% of Christians in the US are fundamentalists, but I think they were lumping in the evangelicals, which maybe there is a difference there. But, you know, I've heard a little bit around fear and simplicity, but what else would you speak to about why people are so attracted to this? Yeah, just in religion, and then we'll talk about it in other ways.
Well, I think it's what I was saying earlier. We're living in times of rapid change and globalization and, you know, climate change and political instabilities and all of that, you know, creates a longing for something that's stable, that's sure, where, as Jeremy was saying, we don't have to question anything. Here it is, it's given, you know, this is going to make your life good. You do these things, you're going to heaven. You don't even have to question, does it fit in? Is it being virtuous? Or it's just do this and you don't have to think twice. And I think when we're dealing with all of these environmental, psychological, you know, emotional, political pressures around us, I think there's a longing for that simplicity, for just, you know, as much as it, you know, that black and white then is, am I doing it right or whatever, it's we just want it really crystal clear. And I think that's why it's probably growing more in the last 20 or 40 years as you were doing it, because things are changing more and with social media, and we're always hearing what's going on. I mean, you know, growth happens, but before social media, we were sort of more naturally in a bubble. Now, I think we're actively, consciously creating that bubble so that we don't have to be bombarded or, you know, the fundamental. And I think it goes beyond just religion. It's politics, fundamental politics and everything else, where you're told what to believe and you don't ever question it. So it goes beyond religion.
Anything else?
What she said.
I think it's also, it comes back to tribalism. And when things are really uncertain, people mass together, just like a herd of elephants or something, you know, to protect the young inside. It's tribalism. And I think tribalism, for a survival mechanism, makes a lot of sense. For a mechanism to expand, as we were saying, and to go beyond, it's poison.
Survival.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just from a Jewish perspective, you know, I think that the world in general is just so afraid to hold nuance and complexity. And we're definitely seeing this now through the conflict, the terrible conflict with Israel and Palestine at the moment. And in many ways, it is so much easier to, I see the appeal to just have one particular truth on one particular side, and I'm right and you're wrong, and it's so much easier to live in that perspective. So that's where the appeal is. However, the irony is actually, at least in the Jewish tradition, that the word for Jews in Hebrew is Yisrael. That is where the country of Israel comes from, the word Yisrael, which means the Jewish people. And this literally means those who wrestle with God. So the irony for me is that even embedded in our name is this ability to wrestle, to challenge our tradition, to challenge the notion of God, to argue with each other. I'm sure we've all heard, you know, 2 Jews, 5 opinions, right? This is who we are, and yet, just like you said, right, the public face of Judaism, and I don't want to get too political here, but you know, is the super right-wing fundamentalist interpretation of Judaism. And it's easier that way, right? I see the appeal, and it's much more difficult for those of us that are leading communities that are struggling through all of these questions. And yeah.
You did?
If you want.
I think it's growing because I do think it's simple. I do think it is just easy. People have, I mean, everybody in this room has a life that they live every single day. And there are so many complications that just come up in everyday life. Am I gonna have a job? How much money do I make? Can I afford to live in Steamboat? Can I buy groceries? What can I do? Those types of questions every day cause people a lot of anxiety. They just do, and they cause people a lot of stress and pain in their life, and their relationships get stressed out. Well, here comes somebody, be it a fundamentalist Christian pastor or somebody who has a fundamentalist view, and they say, hey, we're going to make this all easier for you. We're going to make this simple. All those problems you're having are just a spiritual problem because you're not praying the right. If you just said the right kind of prayers, all those problems are going to go away. You know, if you just join our church and get to know our people and understand our faith, then your life is going to get easier in every aspect of it. Your relationship's going to get easier, your job's going to pay you more, you know, you just have to pray for the right parking place, that's going to happen for you. It's really just that simple, I think. Is that life in the 21st century is complicated, it is complex, it is stressful, it is anxiety inducing, it is trauma inducing, and it just provides a very simple, easy answer. So it's just walk through these doors and all of your problems will go away. And honestly, I will say, just from my experience, sometimes it does get easier. Can't deny that, because when people join into a community and they become part of a community and they feel connected to other people, even if that faith tradition is horrendous in many ways to many people, you have friends now. You have friends that you can talk to that agree with you about things, that can give you stuff that you didn't have before. You have relationships. And I think the epidemic of loneliness and of isolation in the country and in the world is a reason that these types of communities are just so easy to join. Because you see a church that has 10,000 members, you know, and you think, oh my gosh, how did they know everybody in that church? They do not know everybody in that church, because there are little cell groups that have 4 families in them that all know each other, and they get together and they have dinner, and they get together and they have prayer services. And then there's another 5 families over here. What you have in that 10,000 people is, you know, 500 or, you know, however many small groups of communities of people who genuinely care about each other. And sometimes they have, you know, abhorrent beliefs, in my opinion, but they have friends who share those beliefs. And sometimes that's simpler than trying to go alone and deal with the existential crisis that is trying to figure all this out. I just think that's the way it happens sometimes. Yeah.
That, and I find it so fascinating, Tim, we've talked about this before. As Tim talks about, he's not trying to evangelize, so he's not trying to proselytize people to come to Buddhist his place here. And so, But in the Christian church, it's a lot built around.
Mhm.
And to just what you're saying, and so if I get kind of, the Christian world as pastor, we kind of judge on how many people you got, how much money you got, how much, so it becomes all about getting more, right? It's all about more and get more, get more. And so the way you get more, right, is by making people. Right? So, and so it becomes all about like, it's almost like Christian Novocaine. It becomes all about like, we're just gonna make you comfortable. And it gets, I use the analogy like, kids talk about in the church a lot, like in the church world a lot, where, we got a good signage so people know exactly where the bathrooms are. Because man, if they come and visit and they gotta look around the corner for them, they are not coming back. It's like everything has to be so set up to like just make you like comfy as possible. And then you try to read the gospel, which is really uncomfortable. And that's where it kind of falls apart. But it's so interesting how our tradition is so built about trying to get people in. You're just like, people are good.
Yeah, the bigger my community gets, the more nervous I get.
So I have a couple questions, but one is like, what do we do with this, right? We're talking about how much fundamentalism is increasing, maybe 25% of Christians in the US. And I'm also hearing both Jeremy and Colby, you both said you feel like your religions are being co-opted by that more fundamentalist perspective. People are viewing people. Jeremy, you also said earlier, like, we can't fight with them, but like, what do we do? Because people, they do want that security, they want that safety, they want to be comfortable, but maybe that's not what you're about. I mean, is this something as a religious leader you feel like you need to address? Or like, we don't have a fundamentalist on this panel? Like, we're not talking to them, I guess is what I'm thinking. Should we be, or doing something?
Yeah, so we have, our Israeli family has a whole spectrum of religious observance, including some family members who are what we call in Hebrew Chosei B'Teshuvah, which is somebody who gets more and more religiously observant all the way up until the ultra-Orthodox mentality. And so we do, we're forced in some ways to have these conversations, at least within our own family. And I think that what I feel like is my obligation to do in communication with fundamentalist Jews, and these days also with fundamentalist Muslims, is to actually lean in to those conversations. Many Jews, many more progressive or liberal Jews tend to be afraid to stand up and own our version of Judaism, because in many cases, when we're confronted with somebody who's saying, well, this is the truth, this is how it's written, this is how to practice Judaism, there's no other way, it can be very intimidating. It can be really intimidating to stand up and say, no, there is a different way. There are communities where women can put on tefillin and still find meaning in that, where it's acceptable for LGBTQ people to be welcome in every aspect of Judaism, right? And it's hard to do that, but I think that it's our obligation as progressive Jews and progressive liberal religious people to own our, reclaim in many ways our Judaism, because that's how it's been for thousands and thousands of years.
I'm not sure that it's something, I don't think I'm ever gonna change a fundamentalist's belief system. I think what I believe I have to do is I have to focus on the message that I'm sending. And I have to focus on who I am but be very, honest and direct about that. When people hear me say something, they ask me a question about God and I say, I don't know. You know, that's sometimes the hardest thing to say as the person who's standing up talking about God every week. But you have to just be honest with yourself. I think at the end of the day, most of these fundamentalist organizations are going to collapse under their own desire for power, under their own hubris, under their own, you know, ideas that they are so perfect. I mean, think about it. In the Christian tradition, every time a congregation gets upset because one group is not as fundamentalist as the other, they just split and go in different directions. I mean, you know something about it, but I mean, that's why you have like the first church and the second church and the third church. They were all one church at one point in time, and people just got upset because you weren't saying the right thing or the other thing. The one thing I do think is important to stand up against fundamentalism is when fundamentalism hurts people.
Yeah.
When it hurts people, I think my responsibility is to stand in the way, is to speak up, is to not let that be the voice that carries the day. And I've got a pretty loud mouth and I don't mind getting into trouble. And so I'm not the person who is going to stand by when somebody is saying, you know, that person over there is going to hell because XYZ thing. I won't stay silent about that. So fundamentalism can hurt people. And I think that's my responsibility. Do I think at the end of the day that I'm going to have this big impact on fundamentalism? Probably not. But can I have an impact on 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 people, 1,000 people in my life that I have the opportunity to come into contact with? I hope so. I hope so. And that for me has to be enough. It has to be enough to say that if I've ever had an impact on even one person's life, that I've done what I was called to do. So I don't get into the big picture of like, how do I save everybody? That's not my job. That job got taken care of a long time ago. I don't believe that that's what I need to do. So obviously I'm not a fundamentalist, but I did grow up that way. And it is possible to leave it, but a lot of people leave it and don't go anywhere else. They just check out of religion altogether. I did it for a decade and just happened to come back. But most people who leave those places don't come back. I'll tell you a funny story about just one quick funny story about fundamentalism in these big, huge mega churches. So I'm a lawyer as well. And I have a friend who was a lawyer back in Alabama. And there was this big, huge mega church there that had all these little cell groups and these family groups and stuff like that. Well, she was a divorce lawyer. And it came out in one of her divorce cases that what some of these family groups were swingers groups. They were going to their prayer dinners and having key parties. And so what we think we see from the outside of these big organizations is not often what is actually going on the inside of those organizations. There are a lot of people who go to fundamentalist churches who do not believe in anything that's being said. They're there because their friends are, or because their future dates are. I don't know, but we read into a lot of things that aren't there. So.
Yeah.
So one thing for me is important, is I think, you know, we hear Stevo Springs, like I think I'm friends, or at least friendly, with all the pastors in town. And some of them are fundamentalists. And I think across the board, they're all just good people trying to do good things. And I don't really have any desire to change them. Just like I don't have any desire to change Tim or Karen or, you know. So, and I hope, I hope that, you know, all of our congregations are healthy and good and doing good things for people in different ways. Because there's things fundamentalist churches do for people that I cannot do at all, and that are really super helpful for a lot of people. So, but I think that the point of hurt and harm in the world, I think that's one thing we haven't really kind of gotten on tonight, is like when violence comes from these things, and you touched on that, Kobe was a little bit like, that's a kind of a different animal, but here locally, like, I don't have any desire to change what, there's a philosopher, I don't forget his name, but he says, I don't really care about your beliefs, I care about how your beliefs function, and whatever you believe, is it helping you, is it making you more loving, is it making you do good things in the world, is it, feeding the hungry and lifting people up, you can believe all kinds of different things, if that's coming out of it, then, that's where it really matters, but I think so, for me, it's, I get amused sometimes, like, a lot of people from other churches come and tell me how I'm doing it wrong here, and I was like, so kind of funny, you're not a part of our community, you have no idea what, so I don't want to be that person to another congregation as well, and so.
I think to play on that, and what Jeremy was saying, is we have to watch. I've heard people say, well, I really want nothing to do with, I really don't need to interact with them. But isn't that us now doing to them what we're, prescribing that they're doing to us? And if we don't want to talk with them because we can't deal with the conservatism or the closed-mindedness, then we're doing the same judgment. And so we really have to look at ourselves. And if we're saying that, they're joining those churches and walking through those doors because they're lonely or because they're frightened, then, if we disconnect them, aren't we aggravating that problem? And if we're, want to avoid them or not talk to them because we're afraid of their reaction or their anger back or their closed-mindedness, then we're part of the problem too. And so we should be talking to anybody. We have to look at our own fears and our own sense that we need to isolate in order for us to feel right and safe and everything else. And then, when we come to that place of the open heart and the peace, where we're not judging them and we don't need to change their thoughts or anything else, then maybe we're creating that connection and we're modeling that lack of fear that may get them to walk back out of those doors or not. It really makes no difference. But if what, Tim said at the very beginning, we all have this human experience, then we've really got to look at our need to judge anything and how do we just treat everybody like people and look at our own fears.
I guess just one more question that kind of came up in this last round was, what do you do when fundamentalism causes harm? Whether it's war or discord, or again, I think a few of you mentioned this, how fundamentalism is just bleeding into our entire culture. I mean, certainly politically, people don't talk to people of other political identification, race. I mean, obviously, there's lots of ways that this shows up in our society. But yeah, what is your role as a religious leader when you see fundamentalism causing?
I'll just jump right in here. I don't know the answer necessarily. What I do know is that fundamentalism as a philosophy is influencing a lot of parts of our work. So as I said, I practice law. One of the things that has been coming through the Supreme Court for the last 25, 30 years is this idea of originalism in the Constitution, right? That the Constitution is a thing that was meant to be at one time. That is legal fundamentalism. Sure. Is all that is. It is saying that all of our understanding of how the law of the Constitution was set in 1776, and anything that has happened since then has to be interpreted as Thomas Jefferson or whoever, put it together. So that means that fundamentalism is coming into places not just religiously, but legally and politically. And just because I don't feel like I can convince somebody that their religion, whatever they're doing is not helpful or whatever, that's not my job. I can engage in the public sphere and say, that's not how the Constitution should be interpreted. I can get involved in other places where fundamentalism is rearing its head. And honestly, religious fundamentalism is one of the reasons that we have the Supreme Court that we have right now. And we can't say anything about that. So to say that we just kind of have to live and let live, and like everybody kind of does their thing and we just all kind of get along, I can't get behind that, because right now it's hurting people in the world. And so what I feel called to do is to speak up, at least be one voice that says something different, that says, you know, I'm just one voice, but I have found that when I use my voice, there are a lot of people that say, hey, I agree with you. I agree with you. What can we do in our town, in our city, in our state, that might make a difference, that might change something for people who are being hurt right now? And I'm not trying to jump into politics or anything else, but I am saying that we as public figures, in addition to being religious leaders, we don't use our privilege appropriately if we keep our mouths shut. We have a privilege that we get to speak in places to people about things that other people don't get. And so I feel very convicted, to use a good old Christian word, to say, I'm a white guy. I'll be able to talk to people that other people will never get in the door to speak to. And I have to do that, because that's what I believe I'm called to do.
No, it's really. Yeah, you know, this is just to be really vulnerable with you all. These are all the same types of questions that I know I've been thinking about through this war in Gaza, and I know that our community is thinking about it. And they're really important questions, and I don't know if I'm doing it the right way, but I feel as though, similar to you, that to be a religious leader, we have a platform, we have a microphone. And I try as best as I can to teach and to preach and to model how to navigate this chaotic world that we're all living in. And part of that is calling out hate, no matter who it comes from or who it's towards. And part of it is also using these unbearable situations like war or like political conflict that we are all experiencing as an opportunity for self-reflection and for continuously holding a mirror in front of ourselves, not just personally, but also as a religion, as a faith tradition. In the case of, you know, this unbelievable challenge, very unique challenge of having a Jewish country, which is the state of Israel, right? How can we use what's going on over there as an opportunity for reflection, and to continuously ask ourselves the question, are we using our religion for good? And if not, how can we encourage each other to do better?
So I guess we can open it up now to the audience for questions. Yeah.
So Jeremy, brought something up in my mind when we talked about like the interpretation of the Constitution. I think personally, sometimes it's hard for people who are the more liberal at, end of Christianity. We have problems with the Bible, because for me, the whole text about nobody gets to the Father except through me, meaning Jesus, I fundamentally do not believe that. I believe that everyone gets to their creator in their own way. And so I have a more expansive view than what's in the Bible. And so I guess I struggle as an individual with how the Bible's been interpreted over the years, and like the actual words that are in it that supposedly came from Jesus. And yet Jesus was so much more than that to me. He was like a person of freedom. He was a person of like always talked about, when we talk about fear, he spoke the most about do not fear, I'm with you. Like he went and nurtured people on the fringe. He was always asking people to look at their faith and see how is it not serving you. But then the Bible says all these things about women, about stoning, about just being with Jesus, and I don't agree with a lot of it. So what do we do with that as an individual?
My take on all of that is basically all of that is expedient truth. It's not actually true. It works for some people at a certain time in history, in a certain place, in a certain circumstance. In the Buddhist tradition, we talk about what we refer to as the four reliances. That we're asked to rely on the word, not the person. We're asked to rely on the meaning, the meaning of the word, not just what it says. We're asked to rely on the subtle intention of the meaning, not just the provisional truth. And ultimately, we're asked to rely on our own experience. So I think the outer part, all do this, this is expedient truth. I mean, I would say, we even have some language in the Buddhist tradition, which is you only get to there through understanding this concept. But we handle it very loosely and lightly. And if it takes a lifetime to align with that, fine. We're not trying to push. So we have this idea of trying to rely on the essential truth and the truth that actually we can discover experientially here, not on the external truth.
I guess I'm thinking like, we started this 20 years ago, and the irony to me is like the Gulf War was going on at that time, and that was the whole impetus to start our local group. What can we do? Two people. And it's sad that we're still here, the war that's going on now. And the whole point was like, where does wisdom reside? Like, that's what we were like thinking, like, it's wisdom that can prevent war. So my question, and for me, I feel like the mystics have the wisdom in any tradition. And I'm wondering if you all would agree with that. Like, are the mystical, when I think of mystics, I think of that, like, that's wisdom. And then when I think of fundamentalism, I think it's fear. It's, people just want something, to hold on to because they're scared of something. But when you really get to the mystics, I feel like that's where, all of us have such power. I think of Jesus, like the way he lived his life, and like, if everyone could, really identify with that, we wouldn't be sitting here, in a war-torn world. But I'm just curious to know if you guys feel like the mystical traditions and aspect in each of your religions is where the wisdom resides. It's a weird question, I know.
I think in our tradition, we wouldn't so much talk about mystics, but this is a wisdom tradition. So you we develop our insight into the nature of reality and beings and ourselves. And along with that goes compassion. So we always say that compassion without wisdom is blind, wisdom without compassion is cold. So compassion and wisdom are the two wings on the bird, we could say. So wisdom is absolutely central. Otherwise, we get shanghaied by all these ideologies. You know.
I think, we talk about, experience and rootedness also. I think both things are important. I think to say that the wisdom in any tradition resides in one place would be a step too far. That we want to have groundedness, rootedness, but also be true to our experience and how that comes. And so I think that I would tend to live more on the mystical side of things, or be a little bit more in tune with the mystics probably, but I think I don't think we need to make that dualism of it's here or there. I think they tie together. It's important. I just want to go back to one thing though. Colby, you said something about I don't know if I'm getting it right in the midst of this. Whoever knows when the world right is, right? But you've been an amazing example, embodiment of what you bring in this community, of standing against hate and nurturing a community and trying to find nuance and so whatever you're doing it's amazing and beautiful. So just keep doing whatever.
I think it's a really good question, actually. And I know that it's a good question because now I'm thinking, the wheels are spinning. I guess what I've seen, especially through the last few months, I've seen our people trying to make meaning out of chaos. And I think that that's a pattern within humanity, right? And that will unfortunately probably continue until the end of time. And where I've found meaning personally, and then also where I know that many of our community members have found meaning, have been not necessarily through the mystic tradition, although there is a lot of wisdom there, but rather from a sense of spiritual connectivity. I think that similar to what you were saying earlier about creating a sense of belonging, I think that has become crucial for humanity, in this time, but in particular in the Jewish community, at least how I've experienced it. And what I try to foster in our community is the community coming together, not just to complain, even though Jews are really good at complaining, but rather to come together with a shared perplexity of the world and trying to create a community of practice which engages in spiritual yearnings. So I know that's really, maybe it's mystic in the sense that it's big, but I know that that's been holding certainly me and my family together through this chaotic time, but also the community at large too.
Who would you say for you is like a Jewish mystic that you look to for, to embody wisdom?
Well, wisdom in the Jewish tradition, and maybe this could be a topic to talk about at a future meeting and convening. Wisdom in the Jewish tradition is nuanced. There are many, many different Hebrew words for wisdom, for knowledge. And as far as the mystical tradition of Kabbalah, which is our main study of spirituality and all of the different things that come together. That together with Chassidut would be the two main kind of umbrella forms. And so we really seek through the Sefirot, which are different levels of channeling divine spirit, we hope to achieve a level. So it's not necessarily like a person. I mean, of course, there's the Baal Shem Tov, which is the main kind of original thinker in the realm of Chassidut, Kabbalah. And then there were many rabbis that came after him. But it's more of like a whole aspect of Judaism that definitely I studied in school, but I'm intrigued by your question. I'm wondering if there could be some answers for me
Yeah.
within the Kabbalistic tradition through this
More
chaos.
wisdom in the world.
I think that the world is a mystical place.
Mhm.
And honestly, I think anybody can be a mystic. There's wisdom in every single one of us. Anybody who's ever held the hand of a family member who's dying has had a mystical experience in this world. We all bring wisdom. Everybody has a piece of wisdom in the world. And I think we make a mistake when we put that out there and see that as something we have to find over there, because it's in every single one of us. Everybody in this room has had a mystical experience, could call themselves a mystic, because you gained some wisdom from that thing that you saw or you did or you experienced. And so this is where I think a lot of our traditions get it wrong, is that we lift up these people and we say, you know, this person or that person is the wise one. Well, all they did was look around the world and experience it in a different way and then just say what they saw.
Mhm.
And that is wisdom. And so I just think that at least for me, this is where I think the Buddhists got it really right. And then a lot of us got it really wrong. Because I do think that that wisdom is in all of us, and that we are part of everything that is, and that we are part of the wisdom of the world. The world is a magical, mystical place. I'm not trying to sing the Beatles song. I'm just saying it is something that we can put ourselves apart from or put ourselves within. Something that I thought about earlier, the poet Wendell Berry, he said at one point in time, there's no such thing as sacred and secular. He said there is sacred and there's desecrated. And those are very different things. The world is a sacred place. We are all sacred beings. We are all here in a sacred universe. But we can become blind to it. We can close ourselves off so we don't see it for whatever reason. And then I want to come back to something that you said. I don't think Jesus said that. Just so you know, it's in the Gospel of John, and that's questionable anyway. So I'll take no further questions about that.
Sir, could you introduce?
And so this is where meditation in our traditions. Because if we understand that all beings are fundamentally sacred, that as soon as we sit down just for a short period of time and allow our just to step away, close the door, to allow our mind and our heart to just settle and relax. It's the analogy is like taking a cloudy glass of dirty water and placing it in a still place, and the sediment, settles out and the water is clear. So we can then just naturally, we look out and we see the world in a more balanced, steady, open, clear way. That's wisdom. Is it mystical? It doesn't really matter. That's wisdom. Seeing the world as it truly is. That's the highest perception that we know. So, and this doesn't take decades and decades. We can just experiment it for 10 minutes. Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
Talk about fundamentalism spreading, getting big. But my experience with fundamental Christian people is it says If you accept Jesus Christ as your personal savior, you are saved. Hey, what nicer feeling is it to go through life knowing you'll go to heaven? Do other religions have that? I don't know.
I think it's definitely different in the Jewish tradition, but on the topic of what rewards, right? I think that's what we talked about earlier, and from the Jewish tradition, you know, I think about how the reward, first of all, just like all things, the reward or punishment is found in the Jewish tradition in this lifetime. Right, we talked about that a little bit, Tim, a few weeks ago. And so how I've seen that play out related to fundamentalism versus not, I'll give you an example. So my spouse, he was raised in a traditional household, and he believed from a very early age until he was about probably 22, that if he ate a cheeseburger, that literally God would have a lightning bolt come from the sky and kill him. And this was a literal fear that he had. And then he came to the States for the first time. And he was persuaded by some friends to eat a cheeseburger. Lo and behold, he was not struck by lightning.
They killed a lot of people.
And even more so, he thought to himself, wow, this is delicious. So going back to what we were saying earlier about what do these people get out of it, right? It's so simple to live in that box where the consequence is immediate, whether it's, well, I'll know in myself that I'm going to go to heaven, right? That is really persuasive. In the same way, or similar to the idea that it was very persuasive for my spouse to believe that he was going to die if he ate a cheeseburger. However, it's much more complicated to live in the space of, well, why is that, right? Like, let's talk about that for a second. What does that actually mean? Why is it like that? What's the kavanah? What's the intention behind the way that we live our lives?
Yeah, that would be a good topic for us to do, is like that, how does well, chicken cheeseburger. Yeah. Cheeseburgers and
I don't even know where to begin. I am the evangelical fundamentalist that we talked about maybe.
Great.
You should write me addressing. And so I have, may I sit?
Just
I
hold the
have
mic
some-
by your mouth.
I have some things that I'm just going to share because I've thought a lot about this event. So again, I grew up in the Methodist Church in Steve-O. I went to college and sort of mythed my faith, decided maybe Christianity was but a myth, and was in the Boulder Buddhist community, Tibetan Buddhist community for over 10 years and going to seminary. But in the Bible, which I find is the fundamental scripture, and it certainly has things that are hard to understand. Some of them are, as you said, in historical context, you can have a different understanding of them. But also I find that trust God. When I came out of Buddhism back to Christianity, I went deep into scientific apologetics and absolutely love what's happening. One of the well-known physicists now says that science is becoming a shorter path to faith than religion because of the fact that the parameters of the universe are so precise that there has to have been an intelligent design. So it grieves me that this conversation has not talked about God, especially as we are so blessed to live in this part of his creation, and I give him the glory for it. I also find that the word religion, I think the ligament part is as ligaments joining bone to bone. So religion is reconnecting God and man, and that the only God-authored plan of reconnecting God and man required the anguish of the crucifixion. And so it's not at all about a reward. In that sense, it's about nor about being comfortable among other fundamentalists. It's about having, for 38 years now, coming back from Buddhism, gone deeply, somewhat, as into the study of God's word, which is also called the word of truth. Saint Augustine said, let's see, I'm sorry, where is it? He said that proclaiming that, I'm sorry, this happens, doesn't it, right? You want something to be quick. The greatest act of love, St. Thomas Aquinas, is one can do to another is to lead him to the truth. So when you believe that God's word is the word of truth, that the evidence is enormous from the fact of in the beginning God created, and we see all the evidence of creation. Okay, my definition of proselytize is to attempt in a loving way to persuade or convince someone of what we believe to be true, right, wholesome, spiritually healthy, and eternally beneficial. And finally, spirituality unbound by truth is nothing more than the mystification of certain thoughts and feelings. If you want true spirituality, it must be bound by truth. Thank you for listening. And this has been intense, but eye-opening. And I also must say that I, as a Christian, am eternally grateful for the Hebrew roots of my faith.
So having certainty is a wonderful thing. But I think we need to have humility to say, this is my belief. Because if you have 10 people in the room and 10 people have different truths, everybody thinks they have the truth. Otherwise they wouldn't follow it. Then if 10 people have the truth, 9 people are wrong, by definition. So to have one's confidence is incredibly important in the spiritual path. But to imagine that my confidence that I keep in my mind as a thought experiment, and this is just belief. Once all the filters of our systems and our beliefs and our theologies are ripped away, then everyone sees the same world. That's truth. Until then, this is belief. And belief is incredibly effective and important to get us there. But until we're there, we're not there. Once those filters of our theologies or our conceptualizations or our ideas are finally stripped away, this is liberation, this is freedom. Every tradition says they have a truth. Otherwise, why would people follow them? Everybody. We say it in Buddhism, that we have the truth. But we understand that the truth that we can think about, that's not yet truth. Truth is seeing the world the way everybody will see the world when the filters are dropped.
God's truth.
Well, again, that's just a definition. You could call it God's truth. We call it Dharmakaya. This is just a word.
I don't think it would be an Exploring the Sacred event if all of us didn't leave at least considering converting to Buddhism.
That would help me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really at the heart of it, right? It's about truth and belief, and I was at a conference once in Germany about interreligious, interfaith dialogue, and the whole week, we just explored this topic of truth. And many of the sessions came to the conclusion that it's okay to believe that you hold some kind of a truth, or that your people or your faith tradition holds a truth. But the real work becomes acknowledging that a truth can be true for somebody else.
Yeah.
And that we can hold multiple truths at once.
So that's what we call relative truth. It's truth relative to you, truth relative to them. And this is, again, expediency. At the point where we actually break through to direct experience of the divine, or whatever you call it, then there's no longer belief. There's direct experience. And then we don't have to hammer each other because we know. Yeah.
I think this goes back to what you were talking about earlier, and I can't remember your steps, but there's this, and then it's more ambiguous, until it's not defined. And I think we can call the word of God the written words, or it can be the experience. And I think, Jeremy, you talked about experience, you did too. So if we were to stand on the Grand Canyon and have a moment of awe, that's that mystical experience. That's that wisdom, because we experience limitlessness. For a moment, we're so present, we're in the now. And I mean, the minute we have an observing consciousness again, it's like, oh, I'm having a moment of awe, we're out of it. Yeah. But so for that moment, it's experiential. And the Course says there's never going to be a universal theology or philosophy, but there can be a universal experience, and that's the truth. And if we were to all, if everyone here was at the Grand Canyon having a moment of awe, the words we used, how we explained it, might be unique to each one of us. But what we're trying to explain, which is beyond what we can really vocalize, that's the truth. And I think that's what all of this is touching to in certain words. You know, if I describe my experience of awe, some of you would nod your heads and you'd be in the Karen group, and Tim might use a different set of words. And then I was like, no, he's talking the truth. And I think we got to be very careful, but the word is just sort of pointing at what the experience is. And there is the mystical, there's the wisdom, there's the word of God. And it's pointing to this thing we know, and this is why those words would resonate to you so much, because that's ringing through inside you. And we all have that core divinity. We all have something, some experience holding the person this time that brings that to life. And that's what Tim's talking about in the meditation. How do we sink into that and live in that experience more? We're all going to describe it differently, and different words are going to trigger it, and different experiences, but it's the same in all of us.
Yeah. I also want to just thank you. I didn't catch your name. What's your name?
True or Trudith.
Trudith. I want to thank you, and I want to lift up for just a moment what you taught me, and I think maybe even many of us up here, which is that here we were sitting, right, for an hour and a half, and you were sitting there, and I know I was assuming that everybody in this room was at least on some level in the same worldview as mine, as a non-fundamentalist. And I appreciate the fact that you were, whether you realize it or not, you are modeling in a way what we're encouraging this community to do, which is to listen to other perspectives that might be different than ours. And then only at the very end did you proclaim yourself as a representative of this community that we're sitting up here talking about, right? And so I want to commend you for that. And I want to allow us all to think about what we can learn from what happened tonight in the greater good of our community and the world. Right?
Thank you, Molly. I think that's a great way of wrapping up this conversation. And I'm hearing a number of other conversations we might be having too for future topics. And I appreciate all of you coming and being a part of this conversation with us too. And Jeremy, I'm so glad we asked you to jump on.
Yeah.
Get right in. Like literally the first time we've met him.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. God sent.
He goes around the country doing this.
You just saw him.
So I really want to appreciate all of the leaders too for participating in these conversations each month, and for all of you for being here as well. We'll see you again soon. Oh, there are some surveys. If anyone wants to give us feedback on the table out there, you can fill out. And you can get on our email list. If you're not.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, kidding you about the I'm coordinated. Yeah.
I know, you are. You're amazing. You're my inspiration. They get out here. Yeah.
No, I think it's great.
You know, I give it to
It
them.
wasn't playing either. It's like, wow.
When I say like you're in a lot of yeah.
Nice to meet you. And how are you? Good. Yes, good to be back. Yes, good to be back. It is.
Did you get my? I did, I responded. Oh, I think I said 3 before, if that works. Okay. I don't, you know where we are? Well, I think, think of that, the old buildings.
Yeah, it's part like on the safety side, it's part of that. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes.
Absolutely. All right, absolutely. That's something.
Oh, good to see your face. What are your